Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Full Metal Cast. Not episode 69. I know. That's going to get pushed down the road once again, as I want to make sure it's done right. But it's getting delayed this time once more, as Dirty Civilian put out a video last week that was a masterclass of understanding your audience, your demographic, and putting together a very highly informative, educational, historical video on a very nuanced topic. Beyond that is what has just sort of become the slop of gun content lately. Highly edited, takes of CQB, of shooting at trash, of shilling products, whether they're good or bad, or paid for gun and gear and kit reviews and whatnot. And all that's very cool. It all works towards the same goal of expanding the library of knowledge for the everyday civilian who wants to dive more and more into the space to gain access to greater capabilities and gear and kit, and whatnot, and just sort of arming and making this maybe not well regulated, but this large militia of autistic folks becoming more and more capable each day. And I applaud them for doing this video because I think it is, overall, the message is great. It's a very nuanced topic, and it's not a very sexy topic at the end of the day. You're not watching, all the things that I mentioned. It's not going to be a real attention grabber because you're just going to listen to somebody talk about history and morality and philosophy and whatnot. So they're not going to make, as much money on this video, which is, noble and notable, I do say. However, before I dive in, I want to just clarify a few things here. In this video, I'm not interested in really chipping away at individuals. I'm not trying to smear anyone. I'm not trying to paint anyone as a bad guy. I've always said that drama in this sort of sphere of ours is just really gay, and it detracts from the goal of, normalizing this counterculture that we're growing here. I will, be sharing my thoughts about ideas and thoughts that are shared in the video in the marketplace of free ideas. And so just to reiterate, what I am doing is simply dissecting the media that was put out by DC and providing my thoughts. I'm not attacking the people. And if you get poopy and that hurts you, grow up, get a job, and go outside. This is not the arena of government where my goal is to create the most inflammatory gotcha sort of dunk culture style talking points for viral clips. Again, simply a dissection of thoughts and ideas. So without further ado, I'm going to fire up the video. If I can figure out the media sharing. I'm like a boomer when it comes to understanding how this shit works. There we go. Cool. Okay, let's start it up.
This is one of those videos you make when you want to lose a lot of subscribers on YouTube, but we...
All right off the bat, saying this is a video you want to make if you want to lose a lot of subs. I mean, we kind of went over that. Fair.
Had to make it. Ultimately, this is probably going to make a lot of people angry. The atheists are going to hate that I mentioned God whatsoever. The hardcore Christians are going to hate it because I get, one little thing wrong, and therefore I'm a heretic, and we have to throw the whole thing out. But ultimately, this is a video that we had to make, and a lot of what I've discovered here goes against my natural tendencies. It goes against what my heart wants, but we have to talk about it, and it's about time someone did.
Now, I do think, I'm going to stop there. I do think this has been talked about. I think this is, and I guess we will definitely get into this point later and several times throughout the video. It is very cool that a channel with this following is doing this, though. And maybe that's what he meant by, like, it's not really talked about. No one has really talked about it. And in which I could probably agree that nobody with this amount of following, almost 600,000 subscribers as of today on YouTube, is taking the time and really sticking their necks out to do this. So yeah.
Overthrow the government, resist the three-letter agencies, set up claymores in your front yard. I've got 50 pounds of tannerite stashed under my front porch.
Based.
We've all seen the comments, we've all seen the captions that read something along those lines. And in the circles that a lot of us run in, it's pretty common to hear people throw around the idea of rebellion. Sometimes half joking, sometimes not. Many times it's just posturing to attract other like-minded people, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But here's the thing. Very few of us have ever stopped to actually ask the question.
Oh, ads. Didn't think about that. Sorry, I'm not paying for YouTube Premium.
When is rebellion or even revolution truly justified? And the other problem is that
I'm going to stop there because we're saying people don't talk about this because it gets forgotten about. But then, and I think he goes on here to say it's not flashy, which I think is 100% correct. It's not forgotten about. Let me just make sure.
There are very few people who have a platform the size of ours who talk about this publicly. And I don't think that's out of any ill intent. I think it's the same that is true with us. It just kind of gets forgotten about. It just doesn't get attention because it's not cool. It's not sharp. It's not funny. It's serious. You see,
he's 100% right there. It's not forgotten about. I think it's just not spoken of because it's sort of for two reasons. It's sort of that unspoken no, like voodoo topic that's like, will this sort of pull the cover off all of this and sort of really make the government hamper down on it if it becomes strictly about this? And I think mostly because we all have TikTok brain, there's no 2% off influencer program code to shill for an $8,000 e-bike or thermals or whatever the fuck, right? And people just don't have the patience to sit through a 30-minute video talking about morality and history. You're tuning into gun culture and gun content at the end of the day to watch, the Grantham stuff, the forward observation group stuff, kit review and whatnot. So I think the latter half of that statement is 100% correct. It's not sexy. It's not cool. And it's sort of also the space that I found myself in, right? I don't do a lot. I don't do any video stuff. I don't do any reviews. I don't do anything visually. I do what I do because I find it innately interesting and sort of a space that's lacking where we talk about the morality and the philosophical and sort of the deeper level stuff that's going on in the background. And that's not me trying to glorify the fact that I commentate on political slop. But I find this much more interesting most of the time than a lot of the gun slop that's out there because it's sort of getting played out. It's sort of marginal in the benefit that it's creating at this point, I think. But all that to say, I think the statement that this type of content, this subject is not flashy, and that's why it doesn't get attention, that's why it's not spoken about, is 100% correct.
Without truth and righteousness and wisdom guiding us, rebellion just becomes another form of lawlessness. And more importantly, as we can see throughout history, it just ends up not being effective.
So without truth or wisdom or righteousness guiding us, rebellion just becomes another form of lawlessness. And I do agree with that, but who dictates truth? And that is why there's an overarching theme here that's going to arise. And that's not just exclusive to this video or dirty civilian content. It's a theme that I've noticed throughout. It's sort of a subsect of gun culture. And mostly it's a lot of the newer gen kids coming in. The dog's losing his shit about the mailman. Not sure if you can hear that. But you will have entire nations that are convinced that their ancient beliefs are the truth and have been and are still willing to kill for it. It is, in my opinion, again, and this is about the idea, it is incredibly short-sighted and arrogant to believe that you know the truth via your religion. And he says that, this then leads to rebellions not being effective if you are guided without truth or wisdom or righteousness, right? Well, if the goal is to stand up a more coercive and violent regime than the last government you just overthrew, then your revolution was highly successful. Because every revolution, as we've been over through Tolstoy and as we know through history, every revolution that has ever taken place has only ever replaced one violent regime with an even more violent and coercive one itself. But anyways, we will continue on that. If you haven't found out now, there's a highly religious sort of filter thrown over a lot of this and its delivery. And I'm going to chip away mostly at that. That's not to say I think religion is inherently bad and evil and awful. I think when it's married to the state and to government, you have a very real problem on your hands. And I think by thinking that your specific flavor of religion is the answer for an entire nation and for humanity, you are also playing with very dangerous things. So, but we'll continue.
So today I want to take us back to the beginning, to our founding fathers, to biblical teachings, and to history itself, to understand when resistance is not just rebellion, but actual obedience to God.
And I do believe this: rebellion, not complying with the government, etc., is obedience to God. I have been shouting this from the rooftops every single election year as I watch the herds of sheep put out yard signs and head to the polls to vote Republican because, quote unquote, it is what their faith calls them to do. I watch them don the red crown of their newly elected God King and worship him more fervently than they do their own God in church. They refuse to understand that their idolatry, in this case, flies right in the face of their own religion. And at a base level, allowing themselves to be slaves to such a violent and coercive machine is also a violation of their very holy text. And that's just a couple of examples here. I can't tell if my dog's losing his shit. 1 second. Nope, neighbor's dog. Anyways. And that's just a couple of examples, of being slaves and allowing yourself to support the government that we do today, being a complete, slap in the face to your God and the religion that you worship.
We're going to talk about the role of government. We're going to talk about examples of righteous resistance up to the American Revolution. And we're also going to talk about examples of rebellion without righteousness, like the Age of Piracy and the French Revolution and the Russian revolutions. And ultimately what a modern revolution in America will look like, when it is called for, and what our place is in it. Now, this is a video that has been weighing heavily on me to do for a very long time because it's a hard topic to talk about. I don't feel adequate in talking about it, and inevitably, I know I will make a lot of people angry.
I shout out this tremendously because it is very hard to discuss something. If you are anyone that has more than 2 functioning brain cells, it is very hard to talk about something as if you are presenting it as truth, as fact, in a convincing manner, without knowing all of the facts. And he does differentiate himself from the rest of the pack and anyone in politics who does the exact same thing by putting out this disclaimer, by saying, I am not the expert. I'm going to get things wrong, but I feel very passionate about this, so I'm going to say it. So I salute that 100%. I think that's the bigger man. I think that is the strong thing to do. That's the right thing to do. And it sort of helps sets the stage as, he continues on here. And that's a great place about the marketplace. That's a great thing about the marketplace of ideas, is that, there are going to be good takes. There's going to be bad takes. There's going to be objective truths and objective falsities that are shared. But you can better snuff out who is going to be a better person to listen to and to take guidance from based on their character and statements like this. Like, this is a very truthful, very open, transparent, honest statement that he's putting out here. And so thumbs up for that. Very cool. And something that I like to lean on as well. So that passes the snuff test for me. So just wanted to shout that out because it's very cool.
Atheists will be mad that I reference anything to do with the Bible whatsoever, and the hardcore Christians will say I didn't do it justice or I got 1% of something wrong, so you have to throw the whole thing out because I'm heretical and spreading.
Also very cool to call that out as well. And I think it's very important to also highlight that, right? Because of the political system and the news cycle that we live in, false dichotomies, false equivalencies, non sequiturs, gotcha style things are the only way people are able to think about, not ideas, not a debate, but like, for example, if I say, I'm very pro gun, someone's going to say that I like dead kids or something at school, right? Like, not true, objectively false. It's a very silly thing to base that statement off of. For him getting, one thing wrong in this video, the hardcore Catholics are going to, try to light him on fire. Here comes the dog. Please don't bark. Also very silly. Two things can be true at the same time, which is very important. You know, the pillars of this show, there's a lot of gray areas. Most of humanity is a giant gray area just by nature of us being human. Nothing's going to be black and white. Nothing's going to be ones and zeros as it relates to things that we talk about, things that we partake in. And that's very, very important. So to view this in the light of non sequiturs and false equivalencies is very, very silly, and removes all of the nuance that, is sort of tied to our very existence and our being and our actions. So he's spot on with that. People are still going to do it anyways, though. And that's something that I try to keep in mind as I was going through this as well, and providing my own thoughts and taking them down.
Lies. The truth is, this video could potentially anger everyone, appease no one, and to be honest, I have to be okay with that. About 6 months ago, in a circle of like-minded individuals.
More to come on the like-minded individuals thing, but that's at the end when I'm sort of gathering my thoughts.
Men, I confess that this was a topic that I was really struggling with and that I felt like I had to say something about. They took no sympathy on me whatsoever. I'm getting cold chills just talking about it. They basically told me to suck it up, and you have to do this, and you better do it. So here we are. I've had a lot of help. I've had a lot of guidance from people way more smart and much wiser than I am. So just keep in mind, this will not be a perfect video. I am not a theologian. I'm just a normal dude trying to decipher and understand all of this stuff. I could interpret something incorrectly, but the one thing I don't think that I have incorrect is that God created us all uniquely, and we are his most prized possession. So much so that he loved us and provided a way for us to all have the grace necessary to cover our sins through Jesus Christ. Now, for those of us who can agree with that, there's a lot of room for us to disagree on many other things, and we will. And this video may be one of them. But we here at DC, we had to make this video. I had to make this video. It has been pressing on me, and I have to get it out. For whatever reason, we have been favored on YouTube, and we have had a lot of support from the people, you guys.
Which makes this whole video very cool, by the way, to stick your necks out after, you have received such favorable treatment by the censorship machine that is YouTube, and to keep pushing that envelope with such a spicy topic is very cool. So I do applaud and salute DC for sticking their necks out.
And I think that we would not be doing our due diligence if we didn't take the time to talk about this critical component of what the Second Amendment is all about. Let's go.
Guys, before we carry on, we have to take a moment to thank some of the sponsors that make content like this possible for you every single week. Now, first and foremost is Venice AI.
All right. Very first ad read. We just got done setting the stage for obedience to God via revolution to the government machine. And your very first ad read, not like a YouTube cutaway ad, you recorded this and put this in your video. This specific video is for an AI. That's too ironic. That's too funny to me. You cannot be concerned. There's no way that you could tee up everything you did before and then push and shill for an AI. Are you not concerned about it taking water from families? Are you not concerned about how it is only strengthening the government, who by resisting, by the way, is obedience to God by, enhancing its ability to surveil us? We are God's most prized possessions, right? All AI is ever going to do, all AI has ever done so far is just work towards this giant machine that is only hurting us, yes, by destroying God's creation, the earth, and taking water from his most prized possessions, which is us, right? Like, I'm not sure how AI is the right product placement here. And now the other side of the argument, I'm going to skip this ad read because I have no interest in really listening to this and include this in the episode, is that Venice AI is owned by Eric Voorhees, who is an avid crypto advocate. He has stood up his own exchange and has shared his stance against the government many times. Now, do I still believe that he will sell you out to the highest bidder in a heartbeat, just as every other tech oligarch has? Yes, absolutely. He is big tech at the end of the day, and just like the other asshats, he will sit front row at every inauguration for every new president and shapeshift and change teams to maximize profit potential. And it's my belief that AI is still highly unethical, no matter how you paint it. It will only permanently erase job openings for humans while only expediting the erosion of the beauty of this world and the planet that we live on, as well as your natural rights. So fuck AI, as it just creates artificial, meaningless crap while destroying the very world that you know. But anyways, on we go as I skip through this stupid ad read. And fuck AI, as always.
Now, I want to start off by saying if you aren't a Christian or if you don't believe in God, please don't click away from this video, because at the very least, you should understand what drives and motivates men like me and our founding fathers. Whether you agree with it or not, I do think that you will be better for having watched this video. My goal is not to cram anything down your throat or evangelize you. My goal is simply understanding, because from that, we can all make better decisions when push inevitably comes to shove in this country. So let's start with God's design for civil government, because without the understanding of the design, there is no hard standard by which we can judge whether or not rebellion is actually called for. Now let's go back to the first century. In the first century, Christians had a complex and often hostile relationship with their government, the Roman Empire. They refused to participate in the state religion, they refused to worship the emperor, and they weren't exactly treated well by the Jewish leaders in Rome either. After all, they did
Pause as I took a sip from my coffee. Eyebrow raise for the Jews.
Execute Jesus. Now, authorities at the time generally viewed Christians with suspicion at best, and at worst, persecuted them. Persecution happened in waves that grew in severity for the first 300 years of Christianity, with imprisonment and punishment and executions up until Constantine took the throne. Now, during this time, the book of Romans was written, and in chapter 13, Paul, a follower of Jesus, wrote that every person should be subject to the governing authorities because they are established by God. Now, I've seen a lot of people interpret this as, hey, we should just bend over to the government. But that was not a blank check for tyranny. Rulers are called ministers of God. The Greek word for it is diakonoi. The same word is also used for deacons or servants in the church. You see, they serve under God's law, not above it. So when rulers punish good and reward evil, they are betraying their calling, and their authority becomes illegitimate. Now, Paul wrote later in Acts chapter 5 that we must obey God rather than man. Essentially, obedience to human authority ends where disobedience to God would begin. So when is rebellion called for?
I'm going to pause there. That was a very good way to tie the thread and simplify complex ideas that are lost in poor translations, or translations that haven't really been explained properly to most people who are religious individuals. That idea being that when your representatives punish good and promote bad, they're fumbling the bag essentially at biblical proportions. And again, I think that was a very good job at articulating some and sharing some biblical quotes and passages that a lot of times I know are used actually to, sort of promote just blind obedience to government by those who vote for these asshats. When really it sort of is a little more nuanced than that. And so I applaud him for taking the time to do his research and really sort of clarify some poorly written or interpreted text, which isn't done enough. There's a lot of stuff in the Bible that's taken extremely literally that isn't meant to be necessarily. That's a whole nother conversation regarding translations because that conversation will take you back all the way to the Dead Sea Scrolls and how those were translated and how there's very different interpretations of what came from those. One being that, the basis for our religion as we know it is really a mushroom fertility cult. And that's a really fun rabbit hole to dive down because the monk, or I think it was a deacon, whoever it was, who translated and came to that conclusion, had all of his books bought up by the Vatican so that nobody could possibly read them. And then as you look more into the language that the Dead Sea Scrolls were written in, it's basically wingdings, where one character for sun could also mean rain. And it's very interesting to see how different conclusions can be made about those particular characters. And that's where all this translation crap sort of is stemming from. There's a lot of liberties taken in the translation of these things. And now it's gotten to our generation and the people reading it, interpreting it now. I would say, without a fact, are probably arguably much dumber and men of less conviction than those back in the day. But nonetheless, I think still good on him for taking the time to clarify some of that lesser known interpretation of that text.
Well, resistance is justified, but only under certain conditions. And those conditions were very well.
Oh, couldn't swallow my coffee fast enough. Okay. Resistance is justified, but only under certain conditions. Remember that episode about dogma that I made? And those using words like always and never. Only is also, I would probably say, is on that list. So time to listen pretty closely.
Well thought out by the time the 1500s rolled.
Let me roll that back.
Now, certain conditions. And well, resistance is justified, but only under certain conditions. And those conditions were very well thought out by the time the 1500s rolled around. Now,
said conditions were thought about before the 1500s, so surely they're still applicable today.
Why are we talking about the 1500s? Because that is when the Protestant Reformation happened. And in the years since Jesus' death, Christianity grew from a persecuted minority to a dominant religion in Europe, which culminated in the form of the Holy Roman Empire, where church and state were completely intertwined. And the Holy Roman Empire used religion to suppress, control, and punish anyone who didn't believe and worship in the way they wanted them to. At the boiling point of this persecution, pastors and religious leaders stood up and demanded change. This became known as the Protestant Reformation. The Protestant Christian leaders at the time who shaped the beliefs of the American founding fathers, and thus guys like us to this very day. They were being told what to do because...
Now, it is important to say that those beliefs did shape the beliefs of the founding fathers. However, as we're going to get into, the founding fathers had widely varying religious beliefs and ideas.
As the government says, God wills it. But they were like, no, this is not what God wills. So during this time, a group of Christian pastors wrote the Magdeburg Confession, which was a biblical defense of the right to resist tyranny. This is where the doctrine of lesser magistrates comes in, which you may have heard of before. What is a magistrate? Well, simply put, it's an authority figure. There are higher magistrates like kings, and there are lower magistrates like your town's mayor. They taught that if a higher authority defies God's authority and becomes tyrannical, it is the duty for the lower magistrate to resist, and if they must, rebel. They, as leaders of their community, had to step up to lead individual people in a coordinated rebellion. Now, they outlined 4 levels of tyranny: minor injustices, which are to be endured; greater injustices, which are to be protested; severe persecution, which is to be resisted passively. We'll talk more about that later. An active destruction of true faith and law is to be resisted with force if necessary. It's
Pause. The 4 types of tyranny and how to properly act out against them. Now, the issue I have with this and the whole lesser magistrate idea is that we are again expected to outsource our well-being to someone who will decide what is bad for us, how bad it is, and how we are allowed to respond. Now, the problem with this is, again, only you know what is best for you, not some government official or community figure. There is just no way for that to ever be done in a way that is adequate for you, right? And of course, there's trade-offs. If you're going to live in a civilization, you're going to live in a community, you will have to sacrifice some of your freedoms for said community, no doubt. That's going to be the counter argument. I don't necessarily agree with that. Now, if it's all consensual, if for some miracle everyone agrees that this person is going to be the lesser magistrate and we will follow them, great. However, I don't think again, my belief, and I feel like a lot of people are going to probably line up with this as well, I don't think any inconvenience, any damage, any less than positive or neutral impact that the government or the state has on you is simply just to be endured. There's no scenario in which you would pay a private company and they would do a suboptimal job and you would just say, that's fine, good enough, right? For example, my air conditioner, I need a whole new AC unit. I pay $6-7 to put a new one in. And it still doesn't work, or it's, not working to its full potential. There's no way I'm just going to go, I can just crack a window. I'll just endure it. No, I paid for that. I pay for a specific thing. I'm not just going to endure that. Right. And I think potholes are a great example of this, right? They suck. They're annoying. But they do damage your car over time. That's an expense that I have to pay after already paying for adequate roads and infrastructure. It doesn't make sense to me just to fucking endure it. I don't care who says like it's not up to somebody to weigh that out. If I decide that shit, I want to do something about it, I'm going to do something about it. So already I have an issue with this outsourcing to this community sort of leader, right, and whatnot. And this then also creates a whole nother debate of how are people to organize. How, again, there has to be leaders in every army, in every revolution. There are leaders, right? And so that is important. I'm just not sure if it is going to be a government. I'm going to call it a government figure. And I am now I'm bouncing the idea around in my head live here, sort of walking away from the script I wrote for this. There's a possibility of this working out if they are completely detached from the government of the state. They are community leaders. They are unpaid. And essentially they have no authority, no power, right? If they are simply the gathering of ideas, the mediator of a community, just to sort of facilitate the organization, that could work. I don't see a scenario where it works where they are necessarily the judge to determine what one of the 4 types of tyranny are you experiencing and how you're allowed to organize and respond to it. I don't see that really working out. But there does need to be some sort of forum, whether that's an individual hosting it, where the community can come together, discuss what they're suffering through, and organize from there. I do not dispute that is absolutely necessary. I don't think you need some sort of judge and jury figure to tell you what you're experiencing and how you're allowed to go about responding to it. Because not everything's going to be black and white. Everything's going to be nuanced. What may be a minor type of tyranny for someone may have a much larger impact on, your neighbor than the other. So we may be picking at hairs here and really not getting anywhere. But the second I hear someone say that their, revolution or resistance is only justified under certain conditions, and said conditions are determined by one man, I immediately perk my ears up and I go, I don't know, because that sounds a lot like government. But anyways, enough with that topic.
Important to note that the resistance wasn't personal. It was corporate, it was moral, and it was reluctant. Now, the goal was never revolution just for the sake of revolution or because they were mad. It was for the sake of restoration, to bring the government back under God's law. But
I think 2 things can be true here. I think you could be very angry and at the same time chopping government back down or removing them, to have less power and also sort of restoring the very thing that you wanted. Like potholes, great idea. What are we paying? Never mind. Let's continue on.
But people were to resist under the leadership of lawful, righteous magistrates or leaders. Now, in today's time, this was somewhat demonstrated in the Civil War movie, where federal government had become tyrannical. So under the leadership of state governors, constituents of those states seceded and kicked off somewhat of a revolution. But my big problem with this is, what happens if there are no leaders willing to do this?
Another ad. The Civil War movie was highly stupid, let me just say. It was Hollywood's take on the topic, extremely fake and gay. And so long as there is an opportunity, we've been over this and our government exists as an example of this, so long as there is an opportunity for someone to have dominion and authority over other people and have a benefit or an advantage in society, there will always be the worst of us ready to rise up and seize that opportunity, because the people who chase after those for the wrong reasons are going to do so with more fervor than those who do it for the right reasons. Those who would want to get into government for the right reasons, not in it for the money, for the kickbacks, for the insider trading, for being able to, violate the very laws that they write, those folks, they're gonna do whatever it takes, as we've seen, to secure a spot on that ballot, to secure that office. This is no different than the concept that a law is never going to stop somebody from doing something. If you are an animal that has already justified taking a life, shooting up a school, for example, preying on another individual and robbing them of their natural rights, the law and the consequences of breaking that law, they don't mean anything to you. You've already come to terms with, I'm going to do this. So like, the law does not keep anyone safe in that regard. The same thing applies for those running for office. Those who are going to do so for the wrong reasons, again, to exploit their power, are going to do the exact same things during the race and to get onto the ballot, whatever backroom deals they have to do, whatever kickbacks they need to promise, and will beat out those who want to do it for the right reasons. And so, again, you get a snake eating the tail thing here, but I think that's very important to call out with what we just went over.
1597 Vindiciae contra tyrannos, which means a defense of liberty against tyrants, was written by an anonymous source so they wouldn't be killed. And they asked this very question, and the answer was simple, but I'll be honest, very uncomfortable. If there are no leaders or magistrates willing to lead, citizens must suffer patiently until God raises up new leaders.
Boy, do I hate that. And it is also very clear at this point that we're going about this from a religious angle, as everything has to be done in your God's image. And I do agree with the stance that, not going about things in a violent way, because again, I do adopt Tolstoy's sort of viewpoint on the matter, as that is simply a tremendous waste of life and effort, as any revolution stood up on violence has only brought about worse regimes than the ones overthrown. However, stating that the revolution must be carried out in the particular flavor of a particular religion or religion adjacent immediately creates a schism with those who do not share your faith. And there are more overlaps, and we'll get into this more, with religions than differences. And so it is silly to think that one particular book, one particular sect of faith is the right one, because, and the Middle East exists as proof of this, you're going to just fight about the differences more than you're going to see the similarities. And so to raise a religious banner on this immediately sets the stage for another conflict. And I don't think, again, waiting around for God's chosen leader to decide again which type of tyranny you're suffering under and how you're allowed to go about organizing and responding to it isn't the right way of going about it, because you'll just sit there and suffer for the reasons I just went over about only the worst of us being attracted to power and doing whatever they have to do to secure that power, while those who are law-abiding, moral citizens are sort of stuck. They're hindered until we're able to sort of bridge that gap in our minds and sort of cross that gray area that morality is not always legality, and that good people break bad laws. And I think we're sort of teetering on the edge, the precipice, of that cliff of understanding that breaking a lot of these laws that don't hurt others, that don't impact the natural rights of others, that don't create a negative impact on society, but rather just hurt the ruling class that have established these laws to keep them in power and enforce their monopoly on violence, is in fact the moral and the right thing to do. We're getting there. And I think this video is a nudge off that cliff to understanding that there's more of this thought exercise that has to happen as we look at the laws that are in place and the restrictions that are placed on the good moral law-abiding civilians, that allows us to be preyed upon by, the animals on the same level as us, in society, but also the people ruling over us, which is good. But to say that we have to just sit tight and endure all this shit until God's chosen leader comes along, I don't necessarily agree with. And obviously that's a little hyperbolic. It's not exactly what he said. But when I'm hearing sort of this dogmatic approach to it, my ears, they perk up. And I go, I don't like really what that leads to, and what could be insinuated from that. And again, there are assumptions and leaps made in that, but those are my concerns with that sort of mindset.
You see, if individuals rebel with violence without leadership, it is destined to be a failure in the long term. It is essentially a waste of life. And this is a case for men like me.
Again, Tolstoy's thing, I agree with the waste of life and violence not being the first, second, or third option, but being the very, very last resort, if an option at all.
Like us to be involved in politics. This is also reminds us to take a really hard look at who we elect and ask ourselves not what they voted on essentially, but is this someone who would actually have the backbone and the moral fortitude to resist a tyrannical higher authority?
Pause, because if this is a history lesson, it would be hard to preach down to us to make sure we are electing morally sound individuals, and you would be very hard pressed to find a single one of those on a ballot, since this system of government that exists here and everywhere else for that matter, it prevents such people from even making it onto a ballot in the first place. There's not a single individual that would ever make it onto an election ballot that would have said backbone that would do that for the very reasons I've now reiterated twice before this. That's not how the system works. That's not how you can even begin to run for this country. It's not how you even get the money to run a campaign in this country. And we've seen good guys try to do this, time and time again. You will not be allowed to even make it onto the ballot. And if you do, there's no chance in hell you make it into office. And if you do, there's no chance in hell you're able to do exactly what you want to do. And that's going to be the right thing. I think that this mindset sets the stage just for tyrannical government to grow and grow and grow so strong until the body that they rule over is left so utterly weak and defenseless that a revolution is simply a massacre. It's such a one-sided fight that there is no hope of ever rising up. And I know that we were held off in the Middle East by guys in mud huts with AKs handed down from, generation to generation. And, they ended up winning that conflict, I would say, based on the Afghanistan withdrawal. And many other stories of, revolutions being fought like that. But I think what we're seeing now is almost the equivalent of, how we treated the Native Americans here. You get no say on how you're treated, on where you go and what you're allowed to do. You can be tricked and you can be, talked into and gaslit that you have these choices as far as, voting goes, as far as, your freedoms, quote unquote. But at the end of the day, you have permissions in this country. And I think the more you embody this mindset, that we just have to make sure we're electing the right guy. It's not so much what they voted for, but we have to make sure that they have a strong backbone. The people who are put in front of you as options to vote for will never be that guy. They'll never be that person. And that's just the system that we have today. We've passed that threshold. You're going to be waiting around for God's chosen warrior for a while now. And that's unfortunate. But this bothers me to no end, because the revolution is not going to start from the top. You're not going to find a leader at a government level who's going to lead the resistance or the check down of government. That has to happen from the outside. Just my thoughts again.
We often get so caught up in selecting the people that we vote for based on their talking points in an election cycle.
Again, this is the system of government that we have. Sam Adams, again, you can hate the beer company now with all of your heart. They helped to sort of foster this shitty thought process in the election cycle of electing the guy who you'd want to grab a beer with, right? That is what the election has been filtered down to. You just decide who you'd rather have a beer with, while they promise millions, billions of dollars of kickbacks to foreign countries, to large corporations, all the while you're left to break your car down over the third world country roads that you drive on every day.
But what if we started selecting our representatives based on whether or not they were willing to pay the price for doing the right thing versus higher authorities?
And Tolstoy wrote about this too, actually. Let's say for some crazy hypothetical, we get God's chosen leader. We elect him. He gets into a Senate seat, whatever it may be, assuming that, it's not all of a sudden going to show up and pop up and become president, but even if he did, let's just say he gets in there, there's no way that the machine of government is going to allow him to be the good guy and to actually do what's right for the people of the United States. Because, and again, if we're going to do this in the particular flavor of religion, the evangelical right helped elect Donald Trump. He is God's chosen leader. He is their warrior. Let's go over what he's done for you. Let's see how he is helping you, not become slaves to kings and rulers, to not bow down to the government. Let's see what he's done to restore your natural rights as children and as God's greatest creation, right? He is your chosen warrior for all intents and purposes. Let's just say this is from, again, the same flavor of religion that's coming, that we're talking about in this episode. He got it from these very people who elected him. We're here now. This is your chosen leader, and he is not doing the thing that you want him to do. And even if you did get somebody who wasn't Trump, but still sort of fell under this umbrella as God's chosen leader and whatnot, the system that is in place, the unelected, government and the agencies would never allow him to do the right thing. There's too much money being made. People's livelihoods depend on it. People's livelihoods who have a tremendous amount of power will never cede that power, right? That's human nature. And so to think that, by getting your particular leader in is going to change something from the inside, it's not how that works. Government only lets you run and lets you in the inside if you are of benefit to them. And if you happen to not be of benefit of them, they will put you in a corner. They will find a way to rewrite laws and strip you of your power and not allow you to do what's right. So to think that it's going to come from the inside, you're going to be waiting forever.
I don't think there's too many men like that involved in politics right now. I think there's some, but not many.
That's because power attracts the worst in us. Not necessarily that power corrupts. Power simply attracts the worst of the human race.
That is an uncomfortable truth. So why is having official leadership important? Well, in 1644, a Scottish pastor by the name of Samuel Rutherford wrote another important book called Lex Rex, which means the law is king. Notice that is the opposite of the king is law. Now, he wrote that power is not inherent to rulers. Power is on loan to them from the people and from God. And he wrote...
Exactly. So to think that your leader who you give power to is going to be the guy, that ain't it.
That revolutions should aim to restore godly order, not replace tyranny with anarchy, which is just what would happen if we all went out and rebelled on our own separate ways as individuals. Essentially...
Play it. Whoop. There it is. The other Fox News, mainstream media definition of anarchy. Violence and rape and just chaos and awful, terrible cities on fire and burning and death and destruction. That's not what anarchy is. God's law is inherently anarchy. And again, to reiterate for all, go look up the definition of anarchy. You will not see violence. You will not see terror. You will not see destruction in the definition. All that anarchy is simply that you have no masters on this earth. There is no other God. There is no other slave master than, whoever you decide you want to follow. And I think there's no other God other than the higher power. Let's just say if you are a religious individual, and I was born, raised, confirmed, baptized Catholic, I don't necessarily practice because I sort of fell out of love with the church. I don't think the church has done a very good job at what we're discussing here, at protecting you as children of God. But I still have a relationship with God. But I can still be an anarchist because I don't believe there's anyone on this plane that has dominion over me, right? That's extremely important. You will always be a slave. You will always end up worshiping and paying favor and taxes to kings and leaders that will use it for immoral and unethical things. Excuse me. All right, we're back. I did indeed unplug my mic, it turns out. But what I was saying was that you will always end up paying tribute and taxes and essentially treating your quote unquote elected representatives as gods, as God kings, as rulers, should you not actually adhere to God's law. And another thing I really want to point out is that you are extended permissions that are talked about as freedoms, right? As sort of ways to satiate, and please the crowds and the masses, to give the illusion that, as bad as things may be, as useless and as tyrannical as our government may be, we still have the freedoms that are important. For example, we get to vote, but we went over how that's not really true freedom, as, the people put in front of us are already predetermined and chosen for the wrong reasons and immoral reasons, leading us to never have, the best qualified leaders even available to vote for. Another one is, well, let's talk about religion. The slaves were able to practice religion. They still practice religion, yet they were still slaves in this country. And you're still allowed to practice religion in this country because that is a way of sort of calming this topic, this undertone of, rebellion and, letting that grow. And I think that religion and the churches are very much, maybe not very much, but maybe subconsciously aware of that. And so they don't lean into the things that are violating you and your bodies and your souls as children and as creations of God. And I think that's to stay alive. That's to keep their tax status and whatnot as well, which is part of the reason why I fell out of, love with the church, as I touched on earlier. But that was sort of the direction I was going before I yanked the cord out of my mic, because I talk with my hands like an Italian. In summary, though, anarchy it's not this bad thing that all you who watch Fox News and CNN and whatnot think it is. You look at it just like any other form of government or religion that's not your own. You just don't know what it is. You've outsourced your knowledge or your need to feel informed, not necessarily being informed, to another moron who's trying to make a buck. And you've now adopted, your understanding of anarchy. I'm not calling this guy from DC a moron. I've gotten in fights with plenty of idiots in the comment sections who are bootlickers about anarchy, and they call me a dirty anarchist before I can really go on and explain, my stance on it. And I go, yeah, you're exactly right. Here's why I am. And it's anarchy is just very much anti-red coat sort of stance, in that I am able to at least choose with my consent should I want to be subject to a higher power, which is why I sort of draw the connection to God's law and anarchy. But anyways.
Essentially, resistance must not be emotional, but rather proportional and surgical. Now, this lawful type of resistance is shown throughout the Bible. Hebrew midwives defied the Pharaoh when they saved infants from execution under Egyptian law. And Daniel continued to pray to God even though there was a royal decree that forbade it. And he endured the consequences of that without violence. And even the apostles, the early followers of Jesus, they refused to stop preaching Christ even though they were imprisoned and beaten and ultimately executed. You see, the consequences that
These, however, after fumbling the definition and the understanding of anarchy, are stupendous examples of non-violence and non-violent sort of types of rebellion. These are free things that you can do. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to spend any money. You can just do it. And we see this actually playing out in the UK right now, where this woman was arrested for praying in public. While she wasn't Muslim, where it's perfectly fine for you to pray in public at the time of day that you decided to turn and face Mecca and pray. She was some form of Christian or whatever. They arrested her because they, in their stupid, silly interpretation of a different God's law, while we're talking about this, it was offensive to the Muslims, essentially, for this woman to be praying in public. Now, would the lesser magistrate, let's say she had one at the time, consider this just an inconvenience and that you just must endure it? Because you can still pray at church, you can still pray at home, you just can't pray in public. No, fuck that. It's free. Go out and do it anyways. It may not be legal according to whatever magistrate or whoever the fuck's in power then, but you have the freedom to do it. You are not interfering with the natural rights of others. Simple as that. That's all the math you have to do there. It's moral to do it. Do it.
followers of Jesus, they refused to stop
All that to say, good examples, though.
preaching Christ, even though they were imprisoned and beaten and ultimately executed. You see, the consequences that these individuals endured at face value may seem worthless, but in the long run, that is what set them apart and made them leaders among their peers and their communities. So when we talk about worthy leaders in the modern world, it may take a generation of imprisoned Americans who upon release are viewed as heroes among their common man.
The funniest timeline isn't the Jan 6ers getting released and becoming these leaders chosen by God. The funniest timeline is Luigi just either getting off of all charges or being released from prison, and he becomes, Lisan al-Gaib.
And worthy leaders in a justified revolution or a justified rebellion. In fact, I would argue that righteous revolutions that actually stick, that are actually successful, require certain men to make that kind of sacrifice. Because men and women who come out of that fire are...
Okay, so he clearly read Dune. But jokes aside, this is an example that they're not going to come from within. These leaders, these organizers of rebellion, the disseminators of, the information and the how-to of how to resist government aren't going to be people in government. They're not going to be people you elect into government. They're the people who are being persecuted by government. And there's so many of us at this point. Take your fucking pick. Don't wait for God to choose one. You guys can choose one on your own, so long. And, I'm going to encourage you to do so by picking one that respects and values the natural rights of all human beings. Because that's really as simple as it has to be. You don't need to, really write a whole book on it. It's just really that. But all I have to say, we went over electing and leaders being chosen by God and working under God and whatnot. Well, as really, it's just finding those who have been trampled over the boots of tyranny and have done so and have, gone about facing them in an ethical and a moral and a proper way.
Or kind of above reproach. And they have...
All this to say that nonviolent resistance is the best path forward and should always be option one.
Have the heart of the people on their side. This is an important distinction. Now, these were the teachings upon which the American founding fathers stood. And this brings us to the first great example of a justified revolution, the American Revolution. And I don't just say that because I'm American. You see, the colonists didn't rise up because they were inconvenienced or taxed unfairly alone. We've all seen the meme and we all love it. Our fathers fought over a 2% tax. Well, I would say that is while I kind of agree with that and it's hilarious, it's actually a very simplistic view of what actually happened. Our founding fathers, they rose up after decades of legal appeals, petitions, sermons, peaceful protests. They endured for a very long time, and they believed that King George III had become tyrannical, and there was ample evidence of this. Under his rule, they were denied trial by jury. He stationed armies without any consent of the people in their homeland. There was taxation without representation, free worship was restricted, he even waged war on his own subjects.
Do we need to wait for all these 4 boxes to really be checked? Because I feel like we may already be there if we don't have the majority already. And this is also really feels like a low bar for our government to do. They've done all of these either all at the same time or separately throughout history, and then probably have done these multiple times and way, way worse.
Now, during this period of tyranny, the resistance was led by lesser magistrates, leaders among the people, colonial assemblies, elected officials, pastors, a variety of community leaders.
So now lesser magistrates isn't necessary, and maybe it was my misunderstanding earlier in the video, which I may admit here. Good, I guess, examples given here that these lesser magistrates aren't necessarily, elected officials or people in positions of power necessarily. But still, maybe just don't leave the outsourcing of, the determination of severity or response to tyranny to one person. Only you really have that right to know what's best for you.
So when the Declaration of Independence was written, they appealed to God. It's even referenced the supreme judge of the world, not just raw human power. Might does not make right.
Pause. Might does in fact equal right. Now, I know he's using a different interpretation of the quote and is implying that right is equivalent to moral, and I do agree with that as well. However, if someone wants to take something from you and they have a gun and you don't, that thing is theirs. Uncomfortable as that is to accept, it's just a fact of nature. Laws and norms are simply made up things, while physical ability and skills are very real and tangible. It's understanding how to live in society in a strong and moral, responsible way. That is what separates us from the animals. But this is less so a critique of what was being said and just me being annoying. But might does in fact equal right. Again, we went over how laws don't stop somebody from committing horrible atrocities. They've made up their mind. They nothing stopping them at that point unless you have equal or greater might than they. And an uncomfortable truth to understand in life and in nature, but that is history has showed us, and statistics have showed us that unfortunately has been how things have played out.
They weren't creating something new. They were simply trying to restore the rights that were endowed by our Creator. This is why the revolution produced a durable constitutional republic instead of just chaos or more tyranny. We have rights under God.
Questionable considering where we are today and what's happened since, but okay.
And there should be limited, accountable government.
And actually, let me correct myself. I am not saying that this place is terrible and that it sucks. I still believe, and again, two things can be true. I believe that this is still the best place on earth to live. Full stop. I think that the only thing ruining it is the government, and it needs to be completely removed or severely altered and changed to make sure this stays the best place on earth and the best possible place on earth for generations to come. But I can believe both things. Just wanted to throw that out there.
You have to remember that the United States was created as a last resort under God, not the first impulse under man.
Alrighty, that was heavy and loaded. I'm not really sure where that quote comes from. But that I stopped and thought about that for a minute, because it's very heavy and it's a lot to unpack. But to me, that implies that before liberty, basic human rights, natural rights, the rebellion took place for God. I guess the ends and the means, whatever, since the job was still done. But that's so strange to say that when even in the Constitution, it was, they said they did this for the supreme ruler. They didn't even mention God, which sort of brings me to the counterpoint. And the fact that the founding fathers had very different beliefs about religion and God in general, and especially its marriage to government. There's plenty of documents of them speaking out against government in schools. And I do believe James Madison wrote Memorial and Remonstrance Against Religious Assessments, which is a very interesting, very heavily winded document. But essentially, he speaks out against the precedent of allowing religion in sort of having its own, I guess, voice, its own box, and how that could be dangerous going down the road, giving it, separate rights from the rest of society and whatnot. Jefferson, as flawed as he was, as much as I do like him still, Jefferson also literally created his own Bible where he took scissors and cut out passages from the New Testament that he deemed to be sort of contrary to reason, mostly ones where it painted Jesus as some miracle man, medicine man, and leaving only the ones that considered to be like moral teachings of Jesus, which, may actually be sweet. I haven't really read it. And at the end of the day, like, they did fight for their freedom, and natural rights did align with religious ideas at this time. Even though they all had different beliefs, they did what they did for good reasons, which is why they make the tie to God. The Revolutionary War, however, wasn't a religious war. It wasn't a crusade or a fight to paint this nation as a religious empire or plant some religion's flag over it, which I think is a very important distinction, especially if you want to be the land of the free. You're not the land of a particular god who says you're free, sort of thing. And that's why I point that out. They weren't the same religion. The founding fathers didn't have the same beliefs, but they still sort of came together and did what was morally right. And if they said that was under God and that aligned with what was morally right, sure, true, but you can't paint which God they did that. That's not stated in the documents. And this is all to say that the Revolutionary War was fought for God was again, ends and means. They sort of align in this case, and what was done was what was done, and the right outcome sort of came about. But that's minimizing, I think, the violation of natural and human rights that was taking place. and instead saying they did this because of the church they went to, sort of thing. And I don't necessarily agree with that. It's such a loaded quote. I'm not sure where it comes from, and that's not me. That's probably me not doing my research. I'd be curious to see where that comes from, though, because it's just a head scratcher. It's hard to really get two hands around it in my mind and provide, I think, a proper response to it. But I just don't see that. It's like truth adjacent, right? Like it sounds good and like it sort of lines up with what happened, but it doesn't. It seems like a way of sort of painting over this with like a tint, like a filter, to make it sort of fit the narrative of, religious, acts and whatnot. And again, that's the way you want to speak to your base, because that's who your base is. That's fine. I get it. That just sort of raises alarm bells to me. It's just a weird one.
And I know we all have that impulse in us. So how is this different than any other revolutions or rebellions? Well, let's take a look at the age of piracy and rebellion. I love pirates. I love the Republic of Pirates. It's fascinating. And from the late 1600s to the early 1700s, piracy exploded across the Caribbean, the Atlantic, and even parts of the Indian Ocean. And at first glance, pirates seem like heroes. They're fighting corrupt empires or living free lives on the sea. They're answering to no king but themselves. But unfortunately, there was no principled resistance in piracy. It was filled with greed and often lawlessness. They were not defending liberty. They were pillaging civilian ships. They were murdering innocent people. And they established brutal floating, societies based on fear, loyalty, and ultimately self-interest.
Is this not our own government today, though, running around overthrowing regimes, funding wars, running both sides of a different war depending on which day it is, running psyops on other countries and even on their own people? I mean, it kind of sounds like the United States government. We're not operating on divine justice or law. They're just as unorganized as pirates, but the only thing keeping them standing today is their pure force, their military force. So again, might does equal right. Anyways.
This is partly why they were never really able to coalesce into like a larger, more powerful force. Pirate republics often always collapse into betrayal, violence, destruction. Even the code among pirates were just a bunch of survival pacts among criminals. They
literally our government.
They were not based on justice or divine law. It was rebellion with cause, but it was not rebellion with righteous cause. It was mostly personal vengeance and personal gain, and not in defense of the innocent. In some cases, there were lawful privateers, but even they eventually devolved into piracy after conflicts ended.
Privateers devolving into piracy after conflicts ended. Perhaps just another example of how power and the opportunity to exist outside of the law and prey on others will attract the worst among us to those positions. So I think going back and speaking out against making sure you elect the right leader, the leader, chosen by God into power, kind of silly when even, this is just what power attracts at the end of the day, putting your faith in man, beware the frailty of man. My favorite pillar mostly of the show is that man is flawed. That's just sort of who we are. That's our nature. To outsource any of your natural rights or anything to do with your natural rights to one man or a group of men, it's never going to work out.
We can take Sir Francis Drake, for example. He had a legitimate state commission. He was a lesser magistrate. He was licensed by Queen Elizabeth to raid Spanish ships and settlements as a part of the effort to defend Protestantism against Catholicism, Catholic tyranny from Spain. And he often invoked God's favor in his missions, but even he was motivated partially by wealth and personal ambition.
So let's say he wasn't motivated by wealth and personal ambition. Otherwise, it's totally cool to just slaughter others in the name of your God and your queen who gave you the green light to do it. I don't know. That seems kind of silly, right? Like ends and means at the end of the day, right? Like that's just I don't know. Let me go back. Let me make sure I listen to that right.
We can take Sir Francis Drake, for example. He had a legitimate state commission. He was a lesser magistrate. He was licensed by Queen Elizabeth to raid Spanish ships and settlements as a part of the effort to defend Protestantism against Catholicism.
So far, not great as far as being obedient to God. You got the thumbs up from your queen to go raid and slaughter at Spanish settlements for what reason again?
Catholic tyranny from Spain. And he often invoked God's favor in his mission.
Cool. Slaughter all the Catholics you want to keep Protestantism good for Spain. God wills it. You're good. You got the green light all across the board. No problems. Doing God's work. Go get him, buddy.
But even he was motivated partially by wealth and personal ambition.
And that's why it's wrong, and that's why it failed, and that's why he's an idiot. Okay, cool. Just making sure.
See, without a higher binding moral code, even the best intentioned pirates ultimately fell to greed, power, and fear.
That's my point. If you had a moral code, if you respected the natural rights of everyone, if you saw everyone as God's greatest creation, you wouldn't have done any of that. So I don't know what we're saying right now.
As their new rulers. Now let's take a look at the Irish rebellions of the 17th century. Religious rage and nationalism mixed into an uncontrollable mob. Violence erupted without any clear moral foundation. There was widespread massacre of civilians. The leadership was fragmented. There were no lesser magistrates essentially maintaining lawful order during this time period. Their rebellion was vengeful rather than principled resistance, and the result was bloody suppression for many years and centuries of division, some of which are still felt today, and a lot of bitterness. There was massive bloodshed, loss of legitimacy, and no lasting freedom and increased suffering. That's a key point, no lasting freedom.
Good to point out that violent revolutions really bring about the desired effect. Lasting freedom seems to fall off the face of the earth, and more suffering. Look at our government today, look at the situation that we're in. A lot more suffering. People are less happy, less healthy, unable to afford more things, falling into homelessness, poverty, and whatnot, and way fewer freedoms than we had the year before and whatnot, and increasingly having less year after year. So that is true. Good example of that. Ends and means, though, I suppose. And I think we'll kick that around for a minute here. If I am very vengeful and hateful of the government and I want them gone, I think that's a good enough reason to fight them. You know, so long as we tried everything else, not fight them, bad verb, but to resist them, whether that be non-violently or whatever mean I deem appropriately within my community, as long as it's moral and, you know, respecting the natural rights of others, not the ones who are preying upon and tyrannizing them. What comes after, right? That's the big thing. Why I fight is not going to be what I want after the fight. Like it's one thing at a time. Like it's, I don't know, painting the Irish as sort of the reason for why things didn't really work out or why they failed, you know, why they rebelled is kind of, well, victim blaming is a stupid phrase to use there, but I get this, right? You want to put the onus on the good guys, right? We are the ones acting morally. We're going to take on the responsibility to do things the right way and to make sure that what comes after is the best possible outcome and, you know, really what we want. That's important to act responsibly with the power that we have, right? As lawful as moral gun owners, we know this. We know that we have to act morally as well as lawfully, despite the fact that might does equal right. That's a very important principle to hold on to. So I do get that. But to blame the leaders of these, or, you know, to blame these rebellions for things not really panning out, it's more nuanced than that, right? Like we are forgetting the tyranny that they suffered under and the fact that they are human and that they did go about these things the way. But it is also important to know that we have these examples from history to learn off of. So we might be saying the same thing here. I may just be a little annoying and more nuanced in how I'm breaking it down and looking at it. So I do, as I sort of talk myself into a circle here, I do think he's probably right. We have the responsibility to do this the right way, especially knowing what we know and having a history to lean on and off of and many different examples to look at. But I'm not necessarily painting the rebels in a bad light is sort of, I think, the only critique I had of that.
And more suffering than there was before. Now take the French Revolution in the 1790s. The appeal was for liberty, equality, and fraternity, but it was based on secular reasons alone. They abolished religion, they executed thousands for trivial offenses, and crowned human reason as supreme. They even converted the Cathedral of Notre Dame as the Temple of Reason. Get a headache just from the eye roll hearing that. Now, within a few years, that revolution devoured itself, leading to Napoleon's dictatorship. As much as we love Napoleon and his military feats, it was a dictatorship. And when there's no transcendent standard, there are no guardrails on human cruelty. You've heard it said, with God, all things are possible. Well, as Dostoevsky said, without God, all things are permissible. Now, this brings us to the Russian Revolution of 1917, where a corrupt monarchy was overthrown, but instead was installed a brutal communist regime that murdered millions of people.
Haha, communism.
And that includes 66 million Russians and Christians who were murdered by essentially Jewish Bolsheviks under Lenin and
Jews,
Stalin
eyebrow raise?
from 1917 to 1957. Now, this revolution and the subsequent conflicts defied God. It had no lawful basis, and it devolved into basically nothing more than a power struggle. Pick up a copy of The Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. If you ever want a taste of what true brutality looks like in the name of revolution and rebellion, read that book. And to this day, it is the most difficult book I've ever read, not because it was long, but because it was brutally real. Now, many of these revolutions were led by the same feelings we see today here in America. Anger without principle, violence without righteous cause, hatred of authority just because it's authority. Now, this is one I see a lot, and I know how easy that is to fall into. In fact, my default setting is I'm angry, right? We get so fed up with our federal government doing terrible things, unjust things, unrighteous things, and eroding our rights that we kind of just fall into this default trench of hating the government altogether. Well, unfortunately, as history shows, rebellion can be as heavy as the chains of tyranny. Rebellion for the sake of rebellion is its own prison.
Giving the compressed examples of the French Revolution and leading into Napoleon's dictatorship and the Gulag Archipelago, which is absolutely a brutal read. You should read all 3 volumes. Then telling us to not default into hating the government seems a little silly, does it not? Like, knowing what we know about the regimes he mentioned and history in general, we should absolutely despise and speak out against every overstep and every violation committed by our own government, as they are steps towards those very points in history, right? Like throwing a frog in boiling water versus gradually increasing the temperature. I think it's like, if you let them to gradually increase the temperature, you're just going to become complicit and it's going to be fine. You're going to end up like a country like Canada and Australia and all the other, Far East countries where there are just straight up dictatorships, Like, just as much as we've learned from the past, it would also make sense that, our government has seen how things have went over back then and just through overthrowing other regimes without our consent. And they've probably adjusted their approach to a more gradual descent into totalitarianism, right? Like I mentioned, Canada, Australia, the UK, they're just a stone's throw away from where we are now from like a dictatorship, like a tyrannical sort of government standpoint. Their populations are unarmed. They're arrested for praying in public. They're arrested for memes. They're fined if they don't vote. And they've had their children taken away if they don't subject them to the government's health programs like we saw during COVID. So my stance is keep on hating them, because you should and you can hate them. You should resist and rebel non-violently. Like, 2 things can be true. You should absolutely despise those who violate your natural rights, who violate God's law, like we said, when they promote bad and, punish good. Like, I understand not just blindly throwing yourself at them, and not having an unorganized rebellion and just jumping right to violence, right? That's only going to drop the hammer harder with tyranny. That's been discussed. I do believe that, right? But to say you shouldn't hate them, to say that you shouldn't, question them and despise them and push back at every time they, promote bad and punish good, like you said, is a violation of God's law, seems a little silly, especially if we're talking about history and knowing we know about history and how every single mass atrocity has ever been committed by a government, period, full stop. I don't see the point in saying that you shouldn't hate them, you shouldn't have these feelings about them when they are the bad guys in every scenario throughout history or whatever.
It is its own form of tyranny, and it is the camp in which I see many people in our community fall into, myself included from time to time. Now, this is not how Christians or even prepared citizens should think. We must be focused on obeying God rather than man, and when other men command us to sin or our government commands us to sin, we have to resist tyranny, but only when lawful authority has truly broken the social agreement. And even then, under lawful structures, reluctant, seeking restoration, not destruction. Now,
if violent rebellion is what he's talking about there, yeah, sure. But not violently rebel all day long. It's free and it's moral.
One is a tough pill to swallow, especially for me personally, because I fully understand hating the government for what they do. But the truth is, and I do genuinely hate to admit this, is that there is a big difference between our politicians being corrupt or incompetent and them actively persecuting us.
I don't think there's a difference, right? Like, you, whether you did it ethically or unethically, found yourself into a position of power where you have the trust of people, you have people's lives and their well-being in your hands. You are their servant. You are a public servant. You are serving under God, like we said. And if you break from that, that's not just an oopsie, sorry sort of thing. That's a big fucking deal. It's been minimized throughout, just through the media, through our system of government, through our lack of ability to adequately respond when we are victimized like that. But those two things are the same thing, man. Like, you cannot possibly run for and find yourself in that position of power and do a subpar job, whether that's an accident, whether that's incompetence, whether that's ignorance, whether it's greed. I don't care. Whether it's an accident or on purpose, I don't care. There needs to be severe consequences for that. And if that's people hating you, you can deal with it, I think. Because again, people, through their consent or not, most cases not, I'm going to guess, whenever a mistake is made, you have damaged people. You've hurt people in a way that they wouldn't have been hurt should you not have been in that position. And that carries consequences in the real world, right? There's no arena outside of the government sphere where that you get away with that without punishment, a severe punishment. So I think and again, how things are and how they ought to be are two very different things. And to go back to what he said, about rebelling for the sake of rebellion is tyranny and sort of a prison of its own. Lingering on what ought to be is sort of a form of imprisoning yourself, I understand, because you'll constantly be yearning for something that doesn't exist. However, fighting for what's right and what's moral is part of, at least what I believe the purpose in life is. And I'm not doing it in a violent or immoral way. And so talking about it and sort of raising an awareness and sort of making sure that people are thinking about it in, whatever way that we feel is right is good. It's a productive thing. Because again, I'm not going about this in a violent way. It's again, by definition, it's nonviolence, and it's exercising freedom of speech and talking about truth and fact, and where this leads, where we were and how we got here. Yeah.
And in 2020, if they actually started rounding up people who didn't follow the instructions and get all the things, that would have been active tyranny, and that would have required a very different response than, say, what we want to do to them when they send billions of our tax dollars to fund degenerate agendas in other countries, and in some cases in our own country.
Okay. Did this guy skip COVID? And this is a great example of proof that bringing the water to a boil versus just throwing the frog in at full boil is most effective, right? Let's go back. Let's go back to why we use COVID as Exhibit A, as example one, right? Vax cards were required to get into certain places. Most times, if you wanted to go to work, especially if you were in the military, you needed to get vaxxed. You went to jail for faking a Vax card, regardless of your religious exemption, regardless of whatever reason. The federal government did indeed actively persecute those who did not get the shot, coining the term winter of death and blaming the unvaxxed for all said death that was taking place. The government labeled who was essential and who wasn't. Again, God's greatest possessions. They did not allow you to go to church. Also, part of the reason why I have an issue with the church, because they just bent over for that as well. They imprisoned old people in death camps, essentially, in some states, where they all died alone and scared in care facilities. They lied about the safety and efficacy of their intervention, and that has led to irreparable harm to children, adults, even infants, all the while banning the only known effective treatments, and all of this just for profits and kickbacks. That is why we still use COVID as an example. And this is such a fumble of Exhibit fucking A, I think, just to skip over it as not absolute tyranny. Sure, were they rounding you up at gunpoint? No, we were close to that, though. That is such a whitewashing and an oversimplification of what happened, and an example of how we've gotten to where we are and how this is just going to keep getting, worse and worse and worse because, again, the water level, the temperature of the water just keeps on rising slowly as we sit in it, just getting cooked to death here. And that is why I think an attitude of like, oh, we shouldn't hate them sort of thing, not that wise, because like we are hurling ourselves towards a Canada, a UK, and Australia type nation here. And COVID's exhibit A of that. And I think to skip over that and to just simplify that as in quotes and to minimize what happened is incredibly short-sighted. And also let's go on to the taxes one, right? Taxes and being complicit in the immoral things that government does, it doesn't really count. You shouldn't really be upset about that. You shouldn't be mad about that. You shouldn't non-violently sort of resist and rebel against that. Like, it's a loaded topic. Actually, let me make sure that he finished talking about this first before I go into it.
Now, with that in mind, at this point, I'm kind of wondering, okay, but what should we do when the government isn't directly tyrannical towards me, but is doing horrible things with my tax dollars or with the funds from my taxes? Well, if you're paying taxes to a government funding wickedness, like, are you complicit? Are we complicit in that? And how much should we tolerate that? My gut reaction and my human heart tells me that tolerating that is absolute cowardice. It enrages me. But the truth is our hearts are often misleading and blind of the big picture. Remember that during Jesus' time, his tax dollars and the apostles' tax dollars were funding pagan temples. And yet he still commanded his followers to essentially do their due diligence towards their government or towards Caesar, to pay their taxes. Now, in the modern context, our tax dollars go towards unjust wars, wholesale corruption, and even some states fund abortions. The key distinction here is this. Indirect complicity through taxes is not the same as direct participation in evil acts.
Sure, agreed. You're not directly holding the gun to the kid's head in the Middle East, but you are funding it, right? And let's come to terms with another uncomfortable truth here, right? Everything's a choice in this life, right? You can choose to non-violently resist and protest and go to jail, and maybe you come out as God's chosen lesser magistrate to lead the people into a long-term, revolution, lisan al-gaib, if you will. You choose to pay taxes. Granted, it is at the threat of death or imprisonment, but it's a choice. At the end of the day, everyone they weighed out the pros and the cons, and they said, you know what? I'm going to pay the taxes because I don't want to go to jail. That's a choice. You are complicit. It sucks, I know. Yes, is it a lesser of two evils? Absolutely, I do agree with him on that. But to say that you are not complicit in that, it's kind of, like a child lie sort of thing. Like, oh, you shouldn't feel bad about it, so it's fine. You're not really complicit in it. You are. Like, I'm not sure how you can really argue against that. It's a very uncomfortable truth to sit with, yes, but like we all choose to offer Caesar what is his to avoid the bayonet or imprisonment. We are lucky to be on this side of the fence, right? We're not in the Middle East. And so we're lucky to have this choice to make, whether to pay the taxes and support our tyrannical government or not. But yeah, if you know what your representatives, if you will, if you know what they're doing with that money and still pay it, then yes, you are consciously making the choice. It is not, again, is it just as bad as pulling the trigger on a drone strike or on a rifle and whatnot? No, of course not. But like, let's not like whitewash it and, as a way to like cope with it and, speak to us as if like we're not adults on the matter. Like, you have to understand it and to sit with it to find a balance with it. You can do it in a non-violent, like resistant way too. You can minimize the amount you pay in taxes through loopholes, or if maybe being a martyr is your deal, don't pay taxes at all. It's totally your call. And like, tax is a great example, honestly. I'm glad he brought it up because this is mentioned time and time again, like with, some of the best writers on anarchy and true freedom and speaking out against government tyranny. This is always step one on the roadmap of like larger scale resistance or rebellion, right? Like, everyone thinks way too big and thinks that we actually need to do something physical. And, violence is obviously the thing we're speaking out against. And it's always the thing, because we're just so filled with rage and hatred, we do lean into that. So maybe there is something to say about human, I guess, impulse there. Sure, I'll give it up. But people forget that like, without the might that the state has, it gives them the ability to hold on to the power and keep you suppressed. They have nothing. These people are inept like morons. The only thing that keeps them in power is the money that you pay and the money that they receive money from institutions in other countries as well to hire militaries and police forces and hired guns of their own to enforce their laws and to keep you down. So the second taxes are done being paid, which is a non-violent form of revolution, by the way, just to stop paying taxes. Nobody, that's a pretty victimless crime, honestly. The only one that hurts is the state who's hurting you. And so that's a pretty good way to, that should be step one if we're going to talk about organized rebellion, is to just stop paying taxes. So just wanted to point that one out.
If direct sin ever becomes required, like forcing doctors to commit abortion or anything like that, lawful resistance is in order.
It's like I'm so confused because they're using your very taxes to incentivize the things that you're saying right now. And my stance on abortion has been very clear in how I've tied similarities to gun rights and whatnot. But like, it's just such an interesting framing of the issue of you supporting a machine that murders and does things that objectively fly in the face of your beliefs or religion. You shouldn't get mad about it because it doesn't directly impact you, or they're not doing it, explicitly or directly themselves. I don't, and this is, again, this sort of comes back to the coping when it comes time to election season of voting for the lesser evil. Like, evil is evil. I struggle to find any part in the religious book that says you must support the lesser of the two evils, find who's doing the devil's work the least, even though it's still the devil's work, and pay them, what's due to them, sort of thing. That seems oddly silly to me. And like, here's a hypothetical applying this logic, right? Like, the ATF decides that braces are suddenly illegal, and unless you pay $200 or destroy your property, you are a felon and are to be thrown in jail. But like, you only own 16-inch rifles, let's just say. So this doesn't directly impact you. Therefore, you shouldn't be mad. Or just pay the $200 since it's not that much in the context of the value of your rifle. It's just a small tax to pay anyway. It doesn't really impact you. It's fine. Like, it's totally cool. Like, no, that's silly. That's stupid. I think another one, just wear a mask, right? Let's go back to the COVID thing. Just wear a mask. It doesn't impact you. They're not directly like forcing you to put on masks at gunpoint. It's to make people feel safe around you. Let the state trample over your freedom to decide the very things you wear, since it doesn't really harm you at the end of the day. Don't be angry. Just help the country return to normal, right? And for shits and giggles, let's do this. Let's try this one, right? Your taxes are funding experiments that your government is running on African Americans, where they lie to them about vaccinations they're receiving and shoot them up with syphilis instead, just to see what happens for 40 fucking years. But since you're white and that doesn't really impact you, it's just a bad thing the government is doing. You shouldn't be mad or hateful or really do anything about that, right? Like, peaceful protest, civil disobedience is always step one. In any of those things, I don't think like any of us who have, more than 2 brain cells and some sort of self-sufficiency and like a will to live, didn't just go, nah, it's fine. Just sort of deal with it. Right. Like, people who it's step fucking one. I don't see how you can like whitewash over all of that sort of thing. Like, these aren't like, it drives me up the wall when I'm hearing people going, oh, it's not that big of a deal. Oh, just sort of deal with the thing, because it goes back to the raising the temperature of the fucking water. None of the examples I gave there were lies or hypotheticals or things that have never happened. They've happened in modern and recent history in this country by your own government. So I don't know. Like, if I think most people went through these and all decided they were bad and reasons to hate the government. Most people didn't pay the tax stamp when braces were outlawed, or just slapped a straight up stock on their pistols, right? Most people just stopped wearing masks. And so throwing around the thought about like rebellion being dangerous and, just letting the state just do whatever the fuck they want while they continue to steal your money at the threat of imprisonment and death, while they can just go ahead and use it to fund and promote all the terrible shit that your God is, against, and your religious text is against, and then whitewashing it as, it's fine. They're not really doing it directly. You're not really doing it directly. Just keep doing it. It seems like a very oversimplification and a really silly way of coping with what's going on and allowing evil to sort of have the day.
If there is active persecution in the way of losing property, children, or your life, we can lawfully resist, and we should. But for all things indirect, peaceful approaches are the ones to be taken. And this goes against our nature. This goes against my nature. Many of us like direct justice. We don't want to wait for it. We want to see the government, when we see the government doing X, We want to make them pay immediately with why. Now, this also goes back to the lesser magistrates. If we don't have leaders stepping up to stop wickedness, to lead us in that revolt, essentially, our individual efforts are kind of in vain. So what does this look like for us? Well, biblically justified resistance is always defensive. It's not based on ambition, grievance, or a lust for control. When leaders become a terror to good works and protect evil instead, they have broken that divine agreement. A biblically justified revolution would not start because we are angry over our taxes, even though we are taxed out of control.
Yes, we're angry that we are taxed out of control and they have broken the contract with God, if that's the connection we're making here with that. We're also incredibly upset about where the taxes are going as well. So, like, that's important to call out too.
It would not be anger over an election result or just feeling disrespected. It would only start if the government systematically and violently suppressed goodness and righteousness in the form of, let's say, religious persecution and outlawing the free worship of God, or mandating sin, like forced participation in wickedness, like either comply or you go to prison. Some would argue that is kind of what taxes are, and I understand that argument. Depending on the day, I kind of agree with it. If they persecute the innocent, or if they destroy lawful institutions of self-governments, like say, for example, the ATF decided to raid everyone in a particular town for some, for pistol braces or whatever.
Okay, maybe we're saying the same thing. Maybe I spoke too soon there. Peaceful ways is always the way to do it, but like we're saying about, like we're getting into, we're in that's 2-lane highway, right? We're in different lanes, but we're going the same direction somewhat, I think, which is the important thing to say. Like, I agree with 90% of this video. I just don't want, I feel like it gets washed over a little bit about who the bad guys are, right? The bad guys are the state. In every example throughout history, bad guy. Like, I fear that that's getting lost in a lot of this. And, oh, you shouldn't hate them. Oh, you shouldn't, this, that, and the other thing. No, you absolutely should. And you should absolutely acknowledge what is evil when it is evil, whether it's direct or indirect, right? Like, and non-violently resist and protest at every step of the way, which is what he's about to say. The second half is what he's about to say right here, which is the good part, which is what we agree on. The whitewashing of the evil in the examples just allows the temperature of the water to increase. And that's a very important thing to not lose sight of.
And the local sheriff's department decided, hey, we are going to stand in between. These are our people. We are here to protect our people, and we are going to stand up to this federal authority.
That's not going to happen, though, really, right? Because, like, you chose a job that relies on the tax dollars of the people. And that flow of tax dollars is determined by the government. So in no scenario would law enforcement, by and large, we're using majorities here. There may be some small pockets of small towns where this works. And they'll all use I have to feed my family. I need to put food on the table. I need to support all this and that and the other thing. So I guess the Constitution be damned for your paycheck. But this likely not going to happen, right? Like, for the most part, if the government were to go around saying throw everyone in prison who owns an AR, it's not going to be the politician. It's not going to be, the ATF by and large. That's way too large of an operation. It's going to be deputy shit-ass and sheriff fuckstick who come knocking on your door to carry out the order because they need to feed their families after all.
That local sheriff's office is the local magistrate, or is the lesser magistrate. And then the people could come alongside. And that would be a successful way to do it.
I do agree. If it did happen, though, if law enforcement in a particular pocket did decide to say this ain't right, this is bad, which actually did, I will shout out, it did happen in Arizona. Earlier this year or last year, I think, the governor of Arizona had a fucking woman moment and a power trip where she decided to say something along the lines of, you're not allowed to carry a pistol anywhere or something. And the sheriff definitely went on and said, yeah, we're not enforcing that horse shit. Great example of exactly this. And what's sort of ironic, maybe not ironic, but what's so interesting about this example is that law enforcement, while they do have the best possible chances of rallying the support of the good people in the community who would want to enact positive change, their incentive structure prevents them from being those lesser magistrates, essentially. It's designed to make sure they don't empower the people, instead keep the people down for those who pay them their paychecks every day. That's why I say this is an unlikely example, but it is probably one of the better examples in a theoretical or hypothetical sort of scenario that's being run.
You see, it would have to be led by lawful authorities, lesser magistrates, governors, state legislators, sheriffs, other constitutional officers would have to stand in lawful defense of their people.
And why would they have to? I think that's, again, I went over like why that would be optimal and why that would be great. It has the best chance of speaking to the most people and encouraging the most people to step outside of the box. But again, we're going over their incentive structures. It's a very unlikely scenario where that happens. And if we want to talk about doing things for the right reasons, and, you know, for God and not the impulsive man, anyone who's making a paycheck from taxes ain't in it for the right reasons. So you're going to be waiting for a long time, I fear.
Even pastors and other community leaders qualify as a representation of the people. But first, it would actually require civil disobedience, a refusal to enforce
yes, civil disobedience,
with
always
laws.
step one.
Only if peaceful resistance was met with violence from the government would force be considered, and even then only proportionally and defensively. This is not a bunch of individuals turning red and going hot. This is not mobs burning down cities because they feel mistreated. There needs to be clear, written grievances.
And the issue with this is every single unjustified killing by a cop, right? That is the state's direct hand. That is their quote unquote their peace officer when it's just a law enforcement officer. They're not keeping. They should be a peace officer, but they're law enforcement instead of peacekeeper. And there are many examples where it is a bit of, you know, a gray area, no doubt. But there are just as many examples of cops offing someone without just cause, and through their job, they're, you know, let off without any sort of slap on the wrist, or maybe like a priest, they let them go to a different town and do the same thing. But this does happen, and it gets washed over because of the laws and the legal system here and whatnot. So I do agree with him that, you know, it is very important to have a clear reason as to why things got kicked off. You know, that sort of helps put the onus back on the responsible ones, the smarter and stronger ones, if you will, the rebellious ones in this case. So I do agree with him to an extent, but like this does happen on a daily basis. This isn't something that hasn't happened. It just sort of adds to the mix of the nuance and the grayness of this, really.
A public list of grievances documenting how peaceful protests and peaceful remedies were completely exhausted. We need to be able to demonstrate how the government has broken its oath with God and people. We must be governed by restraint, not mob emotion. No attacks on civilians, no revenge killings or cruelty. I know there's the meme that goes around, the joke that goes around like, well, hey, politicians have families too. It's a funny joke, but the fact of the matter is that is not the way to effect lasting change. That is not a way to win.
Memes will actually. It helps put things in the public square and to normalize sort of thoughts. I do think it's very good to keep politicians afraid. I think that's an overarching theme that's gone missed by politicians, I think, today, and they wouldn't be doing a lot of the things that they were doing if they didn't have that fear. And this is a gray area, right? Don't cross the threshold. Don't stare into the abyss too long here. But the Luigi situation sort of contradicts this a little bit, because after he Luigi'd Mr. CEO from United Healthcare suddenly started, you know, making sure people got the treatment that they needed. And in return, BlackRock is now suing them for being too helpful because it's digging into profits now. So that fear, that sort of background, that thing in the back of your head saying, oh shit, if I don't keep my contract and I don't do, you know, the will of the people and really act, you know, godly, something really, really bad might happen. I think subtly, maybe not overtly, that's very important for somebody who's going to command power over other people and seek power over other people. It shouldn't be the main threat, but there should be that thing in the back of everyone's mind who says, I want to rule over people. I want to oversee and organize people. I want to collect taxes from them. I want to make decisions for their life and their livelihood for them. That needs to be floating around the universe somewhere, I think.
There has to be strict codes of conduct, just like the Continental Army's Christian-based codes during the American Revolution. In fact, George Washington's General Orders on July 9th, 1776 said that the general hopes and trusts that every officer and man will endeavor to live and act as becomes a Christian soldier, defending the dearest rights and liberties of his country. Washington actually strictly prohibited profanity, drunkenness, and gambling, looting or mistreatment of civilians, desecration of property, including loyalist property, unless it was directly from command.
This is like saying, though, I mean, this is just making sure you're getting the bad guys. This is like, I don't know, like, it's good that he did that, but I'm not saying this is like something that really sets him apart necessarily, because like, you're fighting on your own soil. You obviously wouldn't want to go in and pillage and rape and, you know, do all the bad shit to your own towns and settlements, right? Like, you do it against the bad guys whenever leadership says you do it, right? Like, that's, I don't know. It's still good to act as morally as possible, you know, when you're fighting. But like, war is war, and that's sort of just like fighting. I don't know. I'm not saying it doesn't happen where, you know, people take advantage of the situation and, you know, turn on their own being opportunistic and, you know, preying on the very people they're supposed to be protecting. That obviously does happen in every conflict. But this isn't like a crazy statement for a leader of an army to say, I would think.
And soldiers were expected to attend chapel service and maintain moral discipline. And were also to show mercy to captured enemies, not punish them. So I know that's a lot, but what does that mean for us? Here's the warning for people like you, and me for that matter. Throwing around talk of rebellion without thought can be kind of dangerous.
The acts are separate from the thoughts and the words. So like you said, throwing around the thought about rebellion without thought is dangerous. I'm gonna say BS on that one. You know, dangerous freedom will always be preferred to peaceful slavery. And a word is not dangerous. Freedom of speech is not dangerous. And I will simply ask, as my counterpoint to, you know, the throwing around the thought being dangerous, what makes the idea of it so dangerous in this instance? I know that in the video, you know, we think that the danger comes from a rebellion being carried out without righteousness and without the goal of restoring order. But the immediate threat is the current tyrannical state in power that would begin slaughtering its own to hang on to its power. That's my take on that one. I think it's very important to keep, again, that overarching thing in the back of every politician's head, that little bit of fear or that little bit of, you know, tension that, you know, should they step outside the boundaries, should they disobey God's will in their social contract to us, that something not so great is going to happen. It's very important for them to exist in the role that they do.
If we rebel without righteousness, we become the very tyrants that we claim to oppose. If we act without legitimacy, we act against God. We must aim at restoring right order, not just creating new chaos. You see, true resistance is slow, it's reluctant, it's moral, it's organized, and it's proportional. It must come from love of our neighbor and obedience to God and a clear, lawful cause, not some personal vendetta or anger or pride. And freedom without righteousness is just ultimately a new kind of slavery. Before we talk about revolution, we must talk about justice, about God, about the law that stands above kings, presidents, and mobs alike. Have all peaceful and lawful means been exhausted?
I agree, making sure all options are exhausted before you take up arms. I get that. It's important to be armed, though, right? That's why we exist in this space, and that sort of speaks back to the thing in the back of every politician's head of fearing what happens if they, you know, promote bad and punish good. That's why we all have the kits. Why we all have the rifles. This is part of the reason why, you know. And also saying this needs to be led by proper authority. I don't know, right? Like, yeah, follow and listen and surround yourself with, you know, good, moral, strong people. Absolutely. I think appealing to authority in order to find the rebel leader chosen by God, but that I've already beaten a dead horse with that one.
Is this action led by legitimate covenantal authority? Are we acting out of obedience to God or out of pride, fear, and anger? Is the goal restoration of justice under God, or is it simply revenge?
I will say, restoring justice under God, while it is painted with, a religious light, while there's a religious filter over that. Natural rights, restoring and nurturing the natural rights of individuals is a handshake with religion for 90% of it, right? And then we'll get over this a little bit later. That's how I would look at that if you're not religious. Just trying to paint both sides, be a good guy here.
Is it just simply taking down the bad guy? See, the American Revolution succeeded because it was slow, measured, reluctant, spiritual, and lawful. And other revolutions failed because they were emotional, lawless, and godless. If the day ever comes where resistance is necessary in this country, and I think ultimately it will one day, it must be done not just with force, but with the fear of God and the love of our neighbor. The goal cannot be just to tear down. The goal is to build rightly. And if you value freedom and if you love your country, you must love righteousness more than rebellion. And that is hard to do.
Those two things can be the same, though, right? And I think in that sentence, he's saying rebellion is a violent, act of and we're engaged in a war, right? But those two things can hold hands, and most of the time they do, I would say.
I would love to see our talk of rebellion to be matched by our talk of repentance, or our talk of resistance to be matched by our talk of justice and mercy.
Most of the time when I do speak about resistance, it is with justice and mercy at mind. Yes, I have a lot of hatred towards the government, no doubt, but by resisting and doing it non-violently, it's justice in a way. We are reclaiming parts of our soul that the government has taken from us by doing, the thing against them in a moral manner. So again, two things can be true.
We have to love our neighbor. We have to love our enemies. We have to respect lawful authority whenever possible. And more importantly, we have to prepare our hearts, not just all of our gear. And if God forbid resistance ever becomes necessary, it has to be just. It has to be lawful, measured, and corporate, not just personal, emotional violence. Moses resisted Pharaoh only by God's command, and Daniel defied kings peacefully and prayerfully. The apostles defied Rome with courage and without anarchy.
Pause again, because here we go. Posing anarchy and religion in opposite corners is pretty funny, since they literally lived by the sort of sentiment that there is no other gods or rulers except their God. That is all anarchy means. There's nobody on this earth that rules over you. Nowhere in the definition of anarchy does it state lawless, crime, violence, etc. Already been over this. All that mainstream media nonsense is peddled just to keep people in power and to prevent, us from being self-sufficient. Anarchy does not mean you're atheist, I like to point out as well for most people. It means that you can enter into any social contract, you can have any relationship with anyone you want consensually. If I choose that I am going to be Catholic and worship the one true God in that religion, then so be it. I am still an anarchist, though. That's the great thing, right? Anarchy is absolute freedom. That is just a fact. And to say that they didn't act without anarchy, they absolutely did. If they chose to follow certain laws, they chose to follow those laws. If they chose to disobey other laws, they chose to disobey them, while acknowledging that their God was the one true God and that Jesus was the leader that they were going to follow, right? That fits the box, right? So and this is important as well, because to paint one side as opposed to the other, which is why religion is a huge problem as it relates to revolution and holding a hand with government in general, it only creates issues, right? The biggest thing that the state and a government fears, no matter where it is them losing two distinct, or maybe a few more voting groups that they can peddle propaganda to. The second they see all the flags flying under each other and together, it's a big oh no moment, right? The second the two-party system lose power is when they see the voter base starts flying all the same flags, that everyone exists under the same flag. As soon as everyone shakes the hand and say, hey, you know what, we're just all for natural rights and freedom and not being tyrannized, the second this whole thing goes away. So that's why anarchy is part of the reason why anarchy is peddled and painted in a bad light. That's part of the reason why the pride flag is painted in a bad light, among other reasons. I'm just using this as an example. It's why Democrat and Republican have different propaganda that's shot towards each other and to their own bases. It's to keep everyone wound up and in separate camps so that they can continue to perpetuate their power. But the second the same flags start flying under each other, the second the politicians look out their window and realize, oh, fuck, There's not two classes of people that can pit against each other for votes is the second that everything changes, and for the good, I would say. I just want to call that out.
They could have pushed the bucket. They could have pushed it over, but they didn't. You will find that when all of these boxes are checked, and when tyranny comes knocking at the door, it will only serve to spread the gospel and expand the cause of freedom and righteousness. We've seen this all throughout the world. That's how Christianity has grown. You see, you can have all the gear and skills in the world, but I'm afraid that many of us have neglected thinking about when all these skills and all these tactics should actually be employed.
I can agree with that. Maybe originally that's why we got into this space, right? Like, for example, COVID drove many of us into the space, or to step into this space more seriously, right? But, you know, like we went over this at the beginning of the episode, right? Like we probably did drop it because COVID's passed and our TikTok brains moved on to the next piece of media to consume. And that's kit reviews, that's gear reviews, that's shooting at trash and watching edits and reels and whatnot, right? So like, yeah, has it been neglected? Yeah. But at some point, everyone who has stepped into this space is, or will be thinking about that. That's just sort of the nature of this space. But again, we're saying the same things. I'm just being annoying.
Well, we have to look at the big picture. Remember the face of our Father and win the war for our hearts and minds before we go too far down the rabbit hole of just engaging in a million different private wars against the government. It is easy to be a rebel. It's easy to have a rebellious heart. I have one. It's another thing altogether to be a righteous man. That is hard. That is the road less traveled. And ultimately, none of this matters at all if you're not Christ-like towards those around you every single day. It's easy to stand up and tell everyone what you believe and what is good and who is bad. It's easy to posture, especially on social media. It's easy to virtue signal. It's easy to self-brand and curate a persona of being like some hardcore Christian. It's another thing altogether to walk the walk every single day and to treat the people around you and even strangers that you don't even know, and even your enemies, with honor and respect and the same gift of grace that has been given to us through Jesus Christ. That I don't see enough of, and I probably don't do enough of myself. When we talk about revolution and when we talk about rebellion, we have to remember that God calls us to be wise as serpents and as innocent as doves. My biggest personal challenge, and one that...
Sorry, I was just thinking about that. Wise as serpents and as innocent as doves. That's pretty badass. I'm not gonna lie. That's pretty cool.
That I would like to extend to you, if you don't share this already, is to not just be prepared for hardship, but to be prepared for righteous action and the wisdom to know when it's appropriate, when the day comes. Now, if this talk has sparked something in you, or if this has put a splinter in your mind like it has been for me for quite a while, go down the road. Exhaust every resource, read every book you can, talk to every person you can. I don't know what denomination all of this stuff falls into. Quite frankly, I do not care. I don't care. This is just what I have concluded based on all of the people that I've talked to and all of the reading that I've done, and quite frankly, prayer. And I may have some of it wrong, I may have some of it right. I would encourage you to go out and seek it for yourself. There are tons of great resources out there, the books that I mentioned in this video. There's one guy that actually talks a lot about this on social media, Reaper Consultation. And
Reaper is cool. Have been following him for a while. Do so.
And I think that his content is phenomenal, and he's been a great resource to me. I've learned a lot from that guy. And just don't let this sit around and coat your thoughts without pursuing it as far as you can. Get into the Word, talk to your brothers in Christ, talk to the people around you, and get to the bottom of this for yourself. Don't just take it from me.
Alrighty then, let's bring the call back to here. How do I stop sharing screen? There we go. Okay, exit out of YouTube, doesn't play anything. So overall, again, let me reiterate, great message. I agree with over 90% of it. I applaud DC for a great video and putting their convictions out there, exercising their freedom of speech and religion, and really sharing this with their base in a really, really great way, I will say. And while I already went minute by minute and sort of picked out the specific things I do not necessarily agree with and the things that I do, if you haven't guessed, my overarching issue with how this topic was presented is that it was done so from a religious angle. I am not saying the religious teachings and the lessons learned were not morally sound by any means, but the marriage of religion and government has only ever been a recipe for disaster if Your goal is to promote freedom and preserve the God-given natural rights every single human being is born with, something that I have been for since step one. Uh, this is because taking one religion and forcing it upon others will always create turmoil. And two religions and even two adjacent sects of a religion will never see eye to eye. Just like two people can look at the same thing and see two completely different things. It's just what makes us as human beings so unique and special. It's just human nature, right? And there are many religions and subsets of each that have believed that they know the truth and the right way to go about things and have all fought for it and will continue to fight for it. And many times it has just led to generational bloodshed. Now, if you stand up a nation where the church and state are intertwined, I'm assuming that to various degrees, maybe that this is sort of what this video was getting into, given the number of times God being in religion and choices that, or God being in government and the choices government's being made in accordance to a particular God, and also driving rebellion, you will get Sharia law. That is the logical conclusion of the handshake with religion and government, where only the faithful have rights, where only the faithful who follow your one true God can hold power and have the right to rule over everyone else who is created, quote unquote, equal as God's greatest possession, right? And this is sort of where the snake ends up eating the tail, where just by being labeled as a believer, you have achieved a higher status than your fellow man, and that allows you to persecute those with different beliefs, again, now setting the stage for another conflict or revolution. And something like this just happened not so long after the revolution, it turns out. Sam Adams and John Jay actually prevented religious minorities from voting in their states, and they even had a religious test that one had to pass before being allowed to run for office. Now, an ethics and morals test probably is not that bad of an idea nowadays to have, certain people run for office. So maybe they were onto something there. But the bottom line is most religions, and this is just to sort of bring it back to the good of the video. Most religions, bar the extremist outliers, have more in common than not, and all in the sort of the good column, if you will. They all, for the most part, promote loving your neighbor and being a good person in your community. Now, each have their thoughts about how society should be structured that end up contradicting themselves in one way or another. But the similarity among them being so in tune with the principle of respecting natural rights and being a morally sound individual is enough to make, this a universal golden rule, treat others how you want to be treated. And unless you're born or made into a sociopath or a psychopath, not really sure what the difference is. I'm not getting into that, not the point of this. This golden rule is baked into our DNA somewhat. Like at a very young age, we have a basic understanding of what's right and wrong just through our nature, right? And this aligns with God's teachings and many other religious teachings. And unfortunately, it is human impulse and weakness, bring it back to human impulse, that drives us to seek to reshape the world in our own quote unquote God's image, right? Like this is why pillar number 4 was established in my life and why I extended it into this channel and how I look at and view things, beware the frailty of man. Their wills are weak and minds young. And if you ever need a reminder as to why church and state need to remain separate, look at the Middle East, not just Israel. But if you look up pictures of Iran prior to the revolution, you would have an incredibly hard time differentiating pictures from there and the US at the same time period. Once Sharia law dug its claws in, the nation regressed centuries, and non-believers and women alike became subjects and second-class citizens to the faithful men in that country. All are equal, all created equal, be damned, inshallah. And thinking something similar wouldn't happen if your own particular flavor of religion, whatever that may be, was swapped in, is just like thinking what happens in other countries like China, Russia, North Korea, Canada, UK, Australia, all the ones I've mentioned. Like all that can't happen here, even though we're slowly heading there as we went over, we know that's bullshit. And we know that's bullshit because of the very space we operate in. You're here because you're in the gun space, most likely. We train and we prepare and are even talking about this because we know these things are a very real possibility. And I believe we feel them becoming more likely each year. Like he said in the video, he fears that at some point there will be a need for some sort of rebellion movement. Religion, race, sex, etc., none of that matters. So long as we are all truly created equal, and I do believe that we are, I hope that is very clear at this point. If this basic truth is something most people on earth, or in this case, our country, cannot grasp, there will always be struggles and problems and the need for a revolution or lesser magistrates or whatever you want to call it, right? That's part of being human. We are flawed, such as life. The good news, though, is that buried in every man, especially those in America, since our revolution is still young, is an understanding of that golden rule. And that when things do reach a boiling point, we will come together and right the wrong. That is what the founding fathers did. And while the internet is a horror beyond comprehension, and it does drive this division and these derivatives, which is what I'm somewhat doing now. That doesn't escape me. Don't get me wrong, right? It is our printing press. It has allowed for the dissemination of information at a rate and a breadth that is unimaginable to those handing out pamphlets in the town square in the 1700s. We can stay in touch with more people than ever before and keep like-minded folks updated on what is transpiring. We can share knowledge and skills with each other from across the world, and the prepared individual is better equipped and in some cases more skilled than law enforcement today due to the availability of information, training, kit, weapons, etc. And I say all of this because we exist at a time where the opportunity to maximize our numbers, and our numbers being strong, morally sound civilians who are prepared and who respect the natural rights of all human beings. This isn't under a certain political or religious flag. This is just the human flag, right? We exist in this period where we can really maximize our ranks and the efficacy of our ranks, and to organize and to make sure we are proficient in whatever it is that we want to do. It's better, it's greater than ever before, right? And what's even more encouraging is that regardless of your religion, or if you're not religious at all, we all share an understanding of that golden rule that I went over. It's born in us, and we have more in common than not. And so as long as we respect the natural rights of others and desire to live peacefully in freedom, we are aligned. Excuse me. That's all there is to it. That's it. There's no philosophical hoops to jump through. You don't need to really wrestle this to come to terms with good versus bad. It's as basic as it can be. You are either for natural rights or you are not. And every misstep that this government or others have taken can be traced back to that simple principle. Slavery, COVID, the internment of Japanese citizens, everything the CIA has ever done to our own people, right? The ATF murking folks and dogs for victimless crimes, etc. And none of these things would be chill with any religion at the same time either. So at this point, I may be saying the same thing as Dirty Civilian. But we are aligned more than not, and I like this video, period, full stop. However, I would not even be talking about this video. I would not even be here. I would not have even watched it 100 times before taking down my notes and thinking to create this response. Unless I saw the comment that I did under the Instagram post promoting this video where Dirty Civilian had mentioned or had thanked an individual or said that they helped them make this video. And I'm not, I wrestle calling anyone out by name here because I think gun culture drama is stupid as we all work towards the same thing. And at the same time, I don't know Dirty Civilian. I don't know the guy in the comments, right? I just know them through Telegram chats and through comments on Instagram and direct messages on Instagram. So I cannot say that I know them. I can only judge the actions and the thoughts and the words and the ideas like I did for this video, right? Seeing this individual and knowing that he does not believe those who do not share their flavor of religion deserve rights or guns, that is the entire reason why I approached this angle the way that I did and why I decided to look at this the way that I did. And you cannot call yourself a freedom or a 2A absolutist or especially a Christian if you actually believe that. And if you believe that, again, because I don't actually know these people, I'm just going based off of what I've seen. You're staying on gun culture if that is what you believe. I say if, again, I cannot reiterate this enough because I do not know these people for a fact. I have not sat down with them face to face because everything on the internet is fake and gay and retarded, right? This is me going after the ideas and the words and the thoughts, less so the men that I saw in these videos and in the comments and the Telegram chats, right? Didn't see some great things. I don't really like what I've seen espoused in private either. But that is why I looked at this the way that I did. And if these guys, or if their beliefs find themselves at the helm of reshaping this country under a certain banner, it'll look like what I shared my fear was earlier in this little rant after the video. And all this to say, at the end of the day, this is the marketplace of free ideas. That's what makes this so great. They can say whatever they want. I can say whatever I want. And for that reason, my goal isn't to have anyone unfollow or unsubscribe from Dirty Civilian or the guy who helped them make the video, as if anyone actually is going to listen to this en masse and take any action on any of this. I know I am nothing and nobody. The overall message shared in the video is a good one. It's a great one, honestly. And I've said that time and time again, and I'll still stand by that. I think it's a very effective, it's a very good video. The marketplace of ideas is important for this very reason, as it allows every sort of viewpoint to be shared and sweat and vet out before we just go along the path of, one view or another. That's why the elections suck so badly in this country, because you don't have an open market of free candidates, if you will, like we do with free speech. And even the free speech one's getting censored. But it's beyond the point. Don't unfollow, don't unsubscribe, don't hate these people for this, right? Like, it's not about the people, it's about the message necessarily. And there was plenty of liberties that I took in dissecting it from the stance and the viewpoint and the angle that I did, which I shared at the end here. And maybe I'm completely wrong, right? Just like he said in the video, he may be completely wrong as well. Because again, we're not experts in this, but I've seen there's this growing sort of movement in gun culture that is very hyper religious, those who are cosplaying as the Black Templars and whatnot, and like the one movie, whatever the fuck it's called, I forget. But and that's cool and that's fun, and that all sort of helps work towards the same goal, no doubt. But it's no different than Sharia law if that same attitude, if that same sort of thought from that movie, from the Black Templars, whatever it may be, from, what I mentioned earlier about those not sharing your faith, deserving rights or guns and whatnot, it's no different than Sharia law should they find themselves at the helm, getting to recreate this country in their own image or their own God's image and likeness. And that's why the marriage of specific religious banners in government is such a mistake and such a bad trap to fall into. That's really, if there's one takeaway, it's that Sharia law isn't just a Muslim thing. It's anytime a religion finds itself married to government is when it becomes a thing, is when it becomes indecipherable from the two. Israel's no different. Any country that does it's no different. That's just a fact. It's contradictory to absolute freedom and the nurturing and the respecting of natural rights. And freedom is going to be dangerous. Freedom is going to be, it's going to be highly questionable at times. But at the end of the day, absolute freedom gives people the choice to do whatever it is that they want, and they will have to face their God at the end of the day. That's simply it. So TLDR, respect the natural rights of everyone. Violent revolution is only the last option, and fuck AI forever. But that's it. Again, you're more than welcome to unfollow me and, shoot me a shitty DM I'm never going to look at if you hated this and you thought I'm completely off base. But yeah, episode 69 to come, hopefully soon here, so long as nothing else comes out. I saw Lucas just drop his video about the T-Rex arm stuff. No comment on that yet, as I haven't really watched it, but I'm going to watch that right after this. Don't expect a response from that, though. Just can't wait to dig into that. But anyways, stay metal, and thank you.